Listen, I'm going to start with a foreign policy question, and
it's okay. I didn't mean that.
No, I understand.
I didn't mean not to.
But it's the war, and
yes.
So that's not just foreign policy. It's all through the whole society now.
Exactly.
This is going to be a softball, but maybe you can help me out. I was recuperating from surgery in the early part of 2003 and unable to do much of anything else. I spent a lot of time watching C-SPAN. And I remember a hearing that you and you and Lugar held before the war began, but I think we all knew it was coming.
I don't think anybody knew it was coming.
Well, I knew it was coming.
Well, you did, but most major newspapers in America didn't. They wrote editorials thinking it wasn't coming.
Well, I remember writing one saying it's all, that this is a done deal. But here's my point. My point is not my own prescience. It seemed to me from that hearing, and I don't remember, I can't find a transcript of it, so I don't remember exactly, but I remember Lugar was worried about whether we'd be able to get our hands on the oil. He wanted to do something about the oil. I don't recall that you were at all anxious or in any kind of oppositional mood toward the march to war at that time.
You must have been really sick.
I
have the transcript with me. I thought you might raise that question.
Do you really?
I do. I don't have the whole transcript, but I can give you the report that I wrote right afterwards, which pointed out that it would be a disaster to go to war, that we weren't ready to go to war, that it would be a giant mistake.
You at least remember there was a hearing. That you held.
Well, by the way, here's the deal with the hearing. To get the chronology straight from at least my perspective. I held that hearing at the end of July. The purpose of the hearing...
we're talking, I'm sorry, but I'm referring to one that was held in either February or March. You and...
this was after the resolution.
Yeah, after the resolution.
After the resolution.
And that's why I was surprised.
Gotcha. Well,
when you said nobody knew, because I think I knew.
Oh, no. By that time, it was getting pretty clear.
Okay.
Let
me just finish my question and then
sure.
you can go on. My question was, so how has your feeling about this war evolved over the period of time from, let's say, the October 2002 vote to today?
It's been consistent. I thought it was a mistake to go to war. I wrote a report in July before that happened. Wrote editorials that appeared in the New York Times on December 20th. About that time we were talking about it, laying out the price that would be paid if we went to war. Wrote a report called The Decade After, immediately after those hearings before the resolution, saying that if we went to war, there would be a civil war. There would not be enough, this idea of oil, enough oil to pay for the war was not there. That we'd be tied down for 10 years or more, with 75,000 troops there. This is a statement I made on the floor of the Senate before the vote, which lays all that out. So the fact of the matter is, I was a harsh critic of this president's proposal, but I agreed with there were two options, if you remember at the time. And it's easy to everybody, I'm not being facetious, easy to forget it because so much has happened since then. What the option was that we knew the president had the votes for any resolution he wanted. We knew he had more than 51 votes, and he had a very broad resolution saying, I can act against terrorism anywhere. And so the objective, the assignment I was given, not only for the Democrats, but for the Congress, was to write a resolution that was much more restrictive, so the president had to exhaust every other opportunity before he could use force. And as a matter of fact, if Trent Lott, who was then the speaker, wrote a book, and I never knew this. He points out, without my knowledge, that Bush in the early part of the year before we went to war, in the fall, the late part of the year, but before we went to war, in his book said, you got to do something to derail Biden. Biden's opposition to me is too strong. And I actually got having a chance to read them because I read some of your editorials from the New York Times, Washington Post, Baltimore Sun, and others at the time, and I haven't read them yet, but I'll give them to you, where they were saying the same thing most of us were saying, and that is that And there were two options. You were either going to have the embargo lifted against Saddam, because remember, France and liberals in the community were saying, we're killing all those poor Iranian kids. They don't have enough hospital material. The French were beating the drum because they wanted to get in there and have opportunities for telecom contracts and oil contracts and the rest. And so there was this drumbeat of lifting the sanctions on Saddam Hussein, and the overwhelming consensus, including from people I was working with at the time, Brent Scowcroft and Baker and others who were writing editorials as well, saying rush to war would be a big mistake, was that the way in which to keep the sanctions on and get the inspectors back in was to give the president a strong hand, a very strong hand, to be able to negotiate with the Security Council and others, saying, look, we're not only not going to lift sanctions, you got to make them stronger. And the entire Congress is behind it.
Okay, let me just pause there for a moment, if I may. You believed that in October 2002, that the president was honest and that he was not committed to go to war.
Correct.
And do you still think that's...
Oh, no, it was a tragic mistake I made.
Okay, so
I vastly underestimated, along with the bulk of the foreign policy establishment. The other thing people like to forget, your colleagues in the press, and maybe you guys, were writing editorials 6 months earlier about how much of an internationalist Bush had become. Remember, after Afghanistan, everyone was saying, Biden, aren't you wrong? This guy's really an internationalist. Look at what he's done, how he's operated so responsibly, what he's done in cooperation. He often, and just prior to the resolution, after I held those extensive hearings in July, the reason I held those hearings in July was to damp down the call for war. And public opinion went from 70% being for the war, going to war in July, down to 48% after the hearings were over. They were among the most watched hearings. That's what I thought you were referring to.
Yeah, no, I remember those.
But here's the point. This is a really critical point that I refuse to let people forget. And that is that at the time, that summer, before the resolution, Bush's White House was saying through Gonzales he needed no authorization from the United States Congress. They would not go back to the United Nations. They had the ability to use force if need be based on the previous resolutions. So what happened? I sat down with Lugar and others and Colin Powell, who shared our view, and we pressed really hard. And the President of the United States acknowledged, A, he had to go back to the United Nations. B, he did not have authority, so he repudiated publicly everything that was being said by Gonzales, by the Secretary of Defense, and the Secretary, and his National Security team. What happened then? What happened then was there was a coalition made up of the United States Joint Chiefs of Staff, with the exception of the chairman, as well as Colin Powell, as well as informed people in the Republican Party and the bulk of us in the Democratic Party, who thought we were on the winning side of the argument with Bush. Bush went to the United Nations, said war was not even remotely inevitable at the time, said we wanted inspectors back in, etc. So the idea that I made a mistake not realizing how incompetent these guys were. I made a mistake not underestimating the pull that Cheney and Rumsfeld had on him. But the generic point I want to make is everybody now has 20/20 hindsight. They all knew it. Hardly anybody wrote it then, because there was reason to believe he was acting responsibly up to that point.
Well, Scott Ritter wrote it, but everybody said he was crazy.
Well, Scott Ritter is a little crazy.
Well, crazy like a fox.
No,
anyway,
look, even guys are mistaken can be right once in a while.